Yeah. I think you make a very important point there. I mean, the numbers here are really relevant to this discussion because, yeah, mass shootings in America get a lot of attention, and you can understand why. Obviously, they're very shocking events. They're horrible. People have a hard time understanding the motivations or how someone could do that. So it becomes, a more a topic of greater interest because people want to maybe try to. Anytime something is confusing or mysterious, it's going to garner a little more attention. Whereas people can I think on a base level, have a better understanding or can better relate to somebody who has suicidal ideation. And so it's less of a mystery why those happen, but clearly it's much more of the problem when you're talking about gun deaths in America. You reduce the number of gun suicides, that's where you're going to have your greatest percentage impact because they make up so much of the gun deaths in America. And so, you said there that you reached out to some, mental health professionals looking for ways to just initially just to throw money at the problem. But what was it exactly that led you to create an entire program? I mean, it sounds like there wasn't necessarily something that was specifically designed with gun owners in mind when it comes to, off-ramping somebody from, these suicidal ideations.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Looking back on it now, in the beginning, I was super naive. And I just was super excited about the possibility of the firearms industry for once stepping up and doing something, right? And then when I kind of discovered that there's no team out there on the mental health side or plan on the mental health side to kind of combat suicide by firearm. Like they don't have the answers. It was a very depressing day for me because I had to go back and talk to my board of directors and actually say, like, there's nothing for us to fund. We'd be just handing over money to mental health. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, especially if you have an organization that you like. But one of my board members actually made a great point, Rob Pincus, and he goes, hey, anybody could just hand money over to mental health. Like, what are we doing here? That forced me to look inside of the organization and also the firearms industry and say, like, okay, let's get creative here. What can we do to get people the help they need? But maybe we have to come up with the programs. Maybe the mental health side has the tools and the resources, right? So one of the very first things I did was I created the mental health flyer, the screenings, right? So I started putting them in the boxes of my firearms just to see how it would go. I wanted to see how customers react to it. I wanted to see how the industry would react to it, right? I didn't know if NSSF or NRA would be like, Mike, what are you doing? Right. So this mental health screening flyer leads to 13 different categories of mental health screenings. You don't have to be in crisis to take a screening. You can go on there. It's free and anonymous. I thought that's perfect. Right. Now, this is something that Mental Health America had already offered to the world. My thing was, let's just take it a step further and directly send it to gun owners. That's what my thinking was in the box, putting it in the firearms box. So you can go there, you check yourself out. And then depending on where you fall, like, for example, there's a screening for anxiety. There's one for depression. There's one for substance abuse. Maybe you have mild anxiety. Okay. Maybe you have high anxiety, but there's ways to mitigate that. And the resources are there after you take the screening. So that was my first thought. But here's the other thing. So, like, I didn't want it to me, like, you know how people are. It's like, okay, there's a manual. Is anyone going to read it? They see something in the box. Are they just going to toss it out? I wanted for the first time, like, gun owners to say, like, to see something about mental health coming from us, right? Like mental health. And if you read the card, and people can go on the website and see the card, but it says mental health, it's okay to talk about it, right? And it says Walk the Talk America is made of gun people who want to help other gun people. And what we found was that we were getting phone calls from our customers that, would call Eagle Imports, and they're literally like, I just bought a Versa the other day, and I opened it up and there was a screening in here, and they're like, just thank you. I mean, the response was super positive, right? And I kind of had suspected that that's what it would be because being that I've been in this industry for so long, and this, I mean, we met at the NRA show, right? You could walk around any firearms show, whether it's SHOT Show, NRA show, And you will find a huge amount of first responders, vets, active duty military, right? People that their livelihood relies on firearms. And that was one of the things that I always felt that got lost in the mix when we get into the fights with the anti side, right? When they were all talking about gun violence. And it's like, yeah, suicide impacts our industry so much. I mean, clearly it impacted me like in a huge way. I lost the president of my company in 2009. But, you know, to me, I was like, okay, I think it's time for the firearms industry to have an outlet for gun owners to be like, yeah, we care about this too, right? We're always so on the defensive just because of the things that we're labeled, the things that we're called, how we're misunderstood. I think sometimes you can lose sight of what are the things we can do to actually bring this number down. And I'm not here to say that Walk the Talk America is going to be responsible for bringing down suicide completely, right? I don't know that. And people always ask me, Mike, why do you focus on the firearm? Because I'm from the firearms industry, right? If I worked in rope, maybe it would be a different story, or pharmaceuticals, it would be a different approach. But what I want to do is put ourselves in a position as an industry to say we are doing almost more than everybody else to tackle this issue.
Yeah, and I can sympathize with your situation there as well. I lost a close friend to suicide as well. Bob Owens, he was the founder of Bearing Arms. A lot of people in the industry know him and loved him, and as did I. And unfortunately, he had his personal struggles and committed suicide with a firearm several years ago. And yeah, I mean, when you've gone through that experience, I think you can have a better understanding of why it's so important for everyone, regardless of whether you're in the industry or not, or your political outlook on guns, to be interested in preventing these sorts of incidents and these kinds of deaths, because they are just that, preventable in many cases. People can be helped, and I think it's important for the gun owning community, to find ways to help, because I think there is, and I think one of the points you're getting at here is you have a unique ability as a gun owner, as someone in the industry, to reach a gun owner who might be struggling with suicidal ideation and might be able to make a difference in a way that somebody who isn't a gun owner or somebody in another sector of the mental health field might not be able to reach them, especially given concerns around, as you mentioned earlier in the show, the idea that if I talk about this, someone's going to want to take my guns away from me. And so I'm interested, one, in your approach to that problem, right? That is, I imagine, something that comes up when you're dealing with gun owners who may have suicidal ideation, but also may be reluctant to tell anyone.
Yeah, it's been a real interesting journey and an eye opener, right? Because you have 50 different states that have 50 different rules on these things. Some states actually are worse than others, way worse than others. So you take, for example, like, let's just use New York as an example. New York has the SAFE Act. It's not that safe. Like, what they think they're doing to get people help is actually a deterrent to get people help, because so many people, if you go in there and you just say I have anxiety, there's a very good chance that you will lose your rights. That's been one of the great things about Walk Talk America is over the 4 years, as it's grown in popularity amongst the gun community, is that people reach out to us when they're unsure. They reach out to us. Many times they're in a situation where they're okay. They could go get help, and we can reassure them of that. Right. And because the law can be spooky, like, especially when, a law is talked about like it's all encompassing for all 50 states, right? Not every state is New York, right? And Nevada is a completely different scenario. But one of the things that we have been doing that we're really proud of too, is we have a cultural competence course for mental health clinicians where we give CEU credits for them to come through and take the course. It's a 3-part course. But one of the great things, just like we educate firearms owners on the mental health process and destigmatize it, and the counseling process, we do the exact same thing for counselors. There are a lot of clinicians, just like you had mentioned, there's a lot of people that probably want to help, but they don't know how to reach gun world, or they don't understand it, right? So we throw these courses. We've had, just in the state of Nevada alone, we've had over 1,000 people come through these courses that are clinicians. Some of them were probably, we've had them tell us, hey, I was anti-gun before I took this course. Now I'm totally changing the way I think, or now I'm gun neutral, right? That's what we want. We want people to understand the fear that gun owners have. And I've watched clinicians do mental gymnastics in these courses. It's kind of interesting, especially when you're there live. Like, the third part of our course actually takes place on a range where people are actually firing the firearms and getting to touch and feel them. And we've had these roundtable discussions where I've watched these clinicians literally go, I'm trying to think of how I could take somebody's gun, even if I wanted to. Right. And that was a real eye opener for me to see that not all clinicians are here to take your firearms or can take your firearms. Obviously, if you go into any, clinic and you start saying really bizarre things, there you might have an issue. But just, teaching clinicians that going to a range and shooting off 1,000 rounds because you had anxiety is a normal thing. For you and I, we're like, oh, that's it. You only shot 1,000. Oh, that's interesting. But for a clinician who doesn't understand gun culture, that could be a real eye opener. Right. And that's what we got to break down. Right? We have to normalize guns. Guns are normal. People use them in everyday life. Right. So.
Yes, guns are normal, and normal people use guns, as Professor David Yamani likes to say. We had him on the show a little while back. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, about not just educating gun owners, but also educating mental health professionals in gun culture, or the basics of gun ownership, and what is a warning sign and what's not. Because you're right. Yeah, it's a lot like media coverage, right? When you hear about someone having an arsenal, right. And usually it's like they had a couple guns and a couple hundred rounds of ammunition, which is really not abnormal whatsoever in gun ownership terms. But to somebody who doesn't know anything about firearms, certainly I'm sure sounds like a lot of rounds. And so, yeah, going to the range and shooting a couple hundred rounds of ammunition is not something I think most gun owners would look at as out of the ordinary whatsoever. But if you don't know anything about guns, perhaps a clinician might. And it's important to understand those distinctions, right? I guess that's what part of what you teach them.